The corner of that wooden box caught my cheek and I felt the sharp sting before I even understood what had just happened. I touched my face with my fingers, and when I pulled my hand back, there was blood. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to make everything go still inside me. Enough to make me realize that this woman, this person my son had brought into our family, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And in that hallway, in my own home, with my own blood on my fingers, I finally understood that being quiet and being kind and being patient had not protected me at all. It had only made me easier to hurt. Hi everyone, my name is Beverly and I am 68 years old. I live in a small town in Tennessee just outside of Nashville, in the same house I have lived in for over 30 years. It is a red brick house with a white porch and rows bushes along the front walk that I planted myself the year my son was born. Every spring those roses come back, and every spring I think about that young woman I was when I put them in the ground. So full of hope, so certain that if you tended something with enough love, it would always grow back beautiful. I still believe that. I just understand now that it is only true for roses and children and not for every relationship a person tries to tend. I worked as a registered nurse for 34 years. Night shifts, double shifts, holidays, weekends. I gave everything I had to that job and to the patients who needed me. I held the hands of people who were afraid. I sat with families in waiting rooms at 2 in the morning when there was nothing left to do but wait. I cleaned and I cared and I showed up every single day, no matter how tired I was, because that is who I am. That is the woman I built myself into across 34 years of hard work. I retired 3 years ago after my knees started giving me trouble and my doctor told me I needed to slow down. I did not want to slow down. Slowing down felt like something was ending, and I have never been a person who welcomes endings easily. But I retired and I tended my garden and I cooked big Sunday dinners and I babysat my grandchildren and I went to church on Sundays and I tried to build something warm and good in the time I had left. I want you to understand who I am before I tell you this story, because what happened to me should not happen to any woman who has spent her whole life giving. My son, I will just call him my son because this story is not about hurting him. He met his wife about 6 years ago. She was pretty, I will give her that. She had a way of walking into a room like she already knew she was the most interesting person in it and somehow made that feel charming rather than arrogant, at least at first. She had a wide smile and she laughed easily, and my son looked at her like he had found something he had been searching for his whole life. When he called me to say he had met someone special, I could hear it in his voice, that particular kind of happiness that a mother recognizes immediately, the kind that means this is serious. When he first brought her home for dinner, I spent 2 days preparing. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. I bought fresh flowers for the table. I cooked a full meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from my garden, homemade biscuits that I had been making since I was 12 years old, standing beside my own grandmother in her kitchen, and a peach cobbler that my mother taught me to make with peaches from the tree we had in the backyard. When I was growing up, I set the table with my good dishes, the ones I only bring out for Thanksgiving and Christmas and very special occasions. I ironed the tablecloth, I lit candles. I wanted her to walk into my home and feel loved before she even sat down. I wanted her to understand that she was coming into a family that knew how to welcome people. She ate 2 bites of the chicken and told my son that she preferred organic free range. She did not say it to me. She said it to him right there at my table, like I was not sitting 3 feet away from her. I told myself it was nerves. First time meeting the mother, maybe she was anxious and said something without thinking it through. Oh, I let it go. I smiled. I poured her more sweet tea and I asked her about her work, and I listened to everything she said with genuine interest. That was the first night. That was the very beginning of something I did not yet have a name for. They got married the following spring and I was happy for my son. I really was. Whatever small, uncomfortable feelings I had tucked away after that dinner, I pushed them down deep because my son was glowing on his wedding day. He looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever had, and I had raised him to be a good man, and I wanted more than anything in this world for him to be happy. So I went to that wedding with a genuinely full heart, and I danced, and I cried happy tears, and I hugged her, and I called her my daughter, and I meant every word of it. I welcomed her into this family completely and without reservation. Whatever came after, I want that to be known. I opened my arms to that woman. The trouble started slowly, the way trouble always does. It does not announce itself. It does not knock on the door and hand you a warning. It seeps in like water through a crack in the wall, so quietly that you do not even notice at first. You just feel a little damp. Then one day you look up and the whole wall is soaked through and crumbling, and you wonder how you did not see it happening sooner. The first thing she did that really bothered me was the comments about my house. Now, I am not a messy person. I am a retired nurse, and cleanliness is not a preference for me. It is a deeply held value that was built into me through decades of medical work. My house is clean. My house has always been clean, but she would come over and run her finger along a shelf or look at my curtains with this particular expression on her face, this small tightening around the eyes and mouth, like she had just detected something unpleasant that she was too polite to name directly. She never said anything outright critical. She was too careful for that. It was always these little comments that were wrapped so tightly in something that sounded almost like a compliment, that if you tried to call them out, you would sound like the difficult one. She would say things like, "Oh, I just love how you have such a relaxed approach to your home." I could never unwind in a space that was not completely organized. But I think it is just wonderful that you can. Or she would say, not everyone needs everything to match. And I think there is something really cozy about that. Always with that smile, always with that laugh. My son would be in the next room and he would not hear any of it. And I would just smile back and say something pleasant and go home that night and lie awake going over it, trying to decide if I had imagined the edge beneath the words. I had not imagined it. But when you have spent your whole life trying to be fair and generous, it takes a long time to trust your own instincts about when someone means you harm. Then it moved to comments about my cooking. I have been cooking for my family my whole life. My son grew up on my food. He has told me more times than I can count that my kitchen is his favorite place on earth. He has called me from his college dorm, from his first apartment, from the road on business trips, asking me to walk him through recipes because he missed the taste of home and nothing else would do. My cooking is not just food. It is memory and love and continuity and everything. I know about how to take care of someone. She started telling him that his cholesterol was too high and that they needed to eat cleaner, and that my cooking was heavy and old-fashioned. Fine, I understood that. People have different ideas about nutrition, and it was her right as his wife to care about his health. I was not going to argue with that. But then she started saying it at the table, in front of the grandchildren. She would look at whatever I had spent hours preparing and say something like, "Well, just a very small portion for us. We try to be thoughtful about what we put in our bodies." She would say it pleasantly, like a health announcement, not looking at me, but somehow making absolutely certain I heard every word. The grandchildren would watch her face and then look at my food differently. Children absorb the attitudes of the adults they trust, and those grandchildren trusted their mother. My granddaughter, who had grown up eating 2 bowls of my soup and asking for thirds, and getting cobbler all over her chin and laughing about it, started pushing her food around her plate with a careful expression that was too old for her face. She started saying she was not very hungry. She was 5 years old. 5-year-olds are always hungry. She had learned to be cautious about my food from watching her mother's face. That hurt me in a place I do not fully have words for. My food is my love. It is the most direct and honest way I know how to say, "I am here, and I am glad you are here and you are safe with me." She was quietly and methodically teaching my grandchildren to be suspicious of my love. I still said nothing. I told myself she was young. I told myself she had different values about health and wellness, and that was her right as a mother. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that I was reading too much into small things, that not every slight was intentional. I swallowed all of it. Every single time I swallowed it and smiled, and kept cooking and kept showing up and kept being the grandmother and the mother-in-law that I believed a good woman was supposed to be. Then she started pulling my son away from Sunday dinners. Sunday dinners had been sacred in our family my entire adult life. My whole life, every Sunday without fail, family at the table. It was not negotiable when my son was growing up. Sunday was the day you came home. Sunday was the day you sat down together, and you ate and you talked and you reminded each other that you were connected. My son grew up understanding that Sunday was family day, and he never questioned it. After he married her, the Sundays started becoming less and less frequent. First, it was every other Sunday because they had other plans. Then it was once a month. Then there would be entire months that went by, and I would not see my son or my grandchildren at all except for a rushed visit where she would wait in the car while he came inside for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Like stopping by to see his mother was an errand on a list, something to check off and move on from. I would hear the car running outside the whole time he was in my house. I would pack up food for him to take home, food she would probably throw away, and I would hug him at the door and watch the car pull out of my driveway, and I would go back inside to my quiet kitchen and I would sit down at my table and I would not let myself think too hard about it. I asked my son about it once, very gently, very carefully. I said I had been missing our Sundays and I hoped everyone was well. He said everything was fine and that they were just very busy and that she had mentioned feeling like I was perhaps a little too involved in their lives. Too involved. I had not shown up at their house uninvited a single time. I had not called more than once a week. I had not given advice they did not ask for. I had sent the grandchildren birthday cards with a little money tucked inside, and I had prayed for their family every morning without fail. That was too involved. I sat with that for a long time after he left. I turned it over in my mind, trying to find what I had done wrong. I could not find it, and not being able to find what you did wrong when someone has decided you are the problem is one of the loneliest feelings in the world. I want to tell you that I handled all of this with grace, and I mostly did. But there were nights, quiet Tuesday nights and slow Sunday afternoons, when I sat alone in my kitchen and I cried. Not dramatic crying, not the kind of crying that asks for anything from anyone. Just quiet tears into my coffee cup while the house settled around me and the clock on the wall ticked, and outside my window the roses moved a little in the evening breeze. I had given everything I had to my family. 34 years of nursing shifts, of being exhausted and getting up anyway, of making something out of nothing, of being there. I had given and given and given, and now I was too involved and my cooking was too heavy and my house was not clean enough, and I was sitting alone on a Sunday night when Sunday was supposed to be family day. My son did not see it. I am certain of that. He is a good man. He is the son I raised him to be, and he loves his mother and he loves his children, and I believe he tried his best to navigate something that was very difficult to navigate, but she was careful. She was always so careful about when she said things and how she said them and who was in the room when she said them. My son never heard the edge beneath the compliments. He never saw the expression she made at my curtains. He was not at the table when she made the comments about the food. He always seemed to arrive just after the moment had passed. I do not know if that was deliberate on her part or just the way things fell. What I know is that I had no way to explain it to him that would not sound like a grievance I could not prove, and unprovable. Grievances are easy to dismiss as jealousy or insecurity, or old women being difficult. Things continued this way for about 2 years, a slow grinding down, nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to and say this is the thing, this is the evidence. Just a steady accumulation of small moments that added up to something large and heavy that I carried alone. Then about 8 months ago, everything changed. My son called me on a Wednesday evening, and I could hear immediately that something was wrong. His voice had that particular flatness it gets when he is trying to hold something difficult together. He told me that he and his wife were in a serious financial situation. The business he had invested in had not worked out the way they hoped. They were behind on the mortgage. They needed help. Could they please come and stay with me for a while? Just until they got back on their feet, just a few months at most. I did not hesitate, not for 1 second. This is my son. This is my blood. This is the person I would have walked through fire for since the moment he was placed in my arms in that hospital room 39 years ago. Whatever complicated feelings I carried about his wife, whatever small scars had built up over the years, none of that mattered in the face of my son needing help. I said yes. I said of course. I said come home. They moved in with me in early spring on a Saturday morning. My son, his wife, and their 3 children, who were at that time 8 years old, 6 years old, and 4 years old. They brought their furniture into my spare rooms and their clothes, into my closets and her beauty and skincare collection, which was genuinely enormous, into my bathrooms. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that her makeup and skincare products took up the entire surface of both bathroom counters, 3 shelves in the linen closet, and most of a spare bedroom corner. There were boxes and bags and train cases and organizers and I do not know what all else. I had never seen that many beauty products outside of a department store. I did not say a word about it. It was her space now too, and I wanted her to feel at home. I rearranged my entire house to make room for them. I gave them my biggest bedroom and moved myself into the smaller one at the back of the house. I bought extra groceries every week. I stocked the bathrooms with things the children would need. I adjusted my cooking to be lighter and fresher because I wanted everyone to be comfortable and I did not want food to be a source of tension. I put extra blankets in the closets. I bought the grandchildren little things to make my house feel like their home too. Books for their shelves and small toys for the basket by the fireplace. I was trying with everything I had to make this work. I want you to understand how hard I was trying and how genuinely I meant it. The first month was not terrible. We were all adjusting to living together, and there was a getting used to each other period. That I understood was normal. The grandchildren were a pure joy. Every morning they would come downstairs, in their pajamas with their hair sticking up, and they would follow me out to the garden and help me with the watering. The oldest one had started to develop a real interest in growing things and would ask me careful questions about which plants needed more sun and which ones needed less. The middle one was obsessed with the tomatoes and would check on them every single morning like a little inspector, reporting back on their progress with tremendous seriousness. The youngest, my 4-year-old granddaughter, just wanted to be wherever I was. She would hold the hem of my gardening apron and walk right behind me wherever I went, a little shadow in her rubber boots. Those mornings in the garden were the best part of my life during those months. Whatever else was difficult, those mornings were golden and I held on to them. But she was unhappy. I could feel it from the first week. She had not wanted to be there and I understood that. It is a hard thing needing help. It is a hard thing to move into someone else's house and give up the independence of your own space. I had genuine compassion for how difficult it must have been for her pride, but she took her unhappiness and she pointed it at my house and at me rather than understanding that I was the person trying to help her. It started with the kitchen reorganization. I came downstairs on a Thursday morning, about 3 weeks after they moved in and everything. In my kitchen had been moved, not adjusted, not tidied, moved. The pots and pans that had lived in the cabinet to the left of the stove for 22 years were now across the kitchen in a completely different cabinet. The spice drawer, which I had organized my own particular way over decades of cooking, had been emptied out and the spices arranged in a basket on the counter. The coffee maker had been moved from its spot by the window to a different counter entirely. My good knives had been rearranged in the knife block in a different order. The mugs I reached for every morning of my life were now on a high shelf. I needed to stretch to reach. I stood in my kitchen that morning and I looked at everything, moved and rearranged, and I felt something that I can only describe as being erased. These things had been in their places for years. They were not just objects and locations. They were the architecture of my daily life, the muscle memory of 30 years of mornings in my own home. And they had been changed without a word to me, without a question, without a please or a thank you or a by your leave. When she came downstairs, she said brightly that she had organized the kitchen to improve the flow and she hoped I did not mind. My son said that was so nice of her to do that, was it not? And looked at me with that hopeful expression he uses when he wants everyone to get along. I said thank you. I moved things back gradually over the following days when nobody was looking because I needed to be able to function in my own kitchen and I was not going to make a scene about it. But I noted it. I filed it away with everything else. She started having her friends over without asking me. I want to be clear that I am not a difficult person about having guests. I love a full house. I love cooking for people and conversation and the noise of people who are happy to be together. But it is my house, and a simple heads up would have been the respectful thing. Instead, I would come home from the grocery store or from church or from my Tuesday morning walks with my neighbor and find cars in my driveway and women I did not know sitting in my living room with glasses of my wine on my coffee table without coasters. She would see me come in and she would say with that smile, "Oh, here she is, everyone. This is my mother-in-law. She is just the sweetest. She absolutely loves having us all here." And her friends would smile at me warmly and I would smile back and I would go to my kitchen and I would set down my grocery bags and I would breathe. And I would remind myself that this was temporary and that I had chosen this and that I loved my son. The third time I came home to find her friends in my living room, I spoke to my son privately that evening. I kept my voice calm and kind. I said I just needed a little notice when people were coming over so I could be prepared and make sure the house was in order. He said I was being inflexible and that she was under a great deal of stress and that her friendships were important to her mental health, and he hoped I could be more understanding, inflexible. Turned that word over in my mind for days. I had given this woman my biggest bedroom and rearranged my kitchen and adjusted my cooking and handed over my home, and I was inflexible. The comments about my cooking had not stopped just because we were sharing a kitchen. They had gotten bolder now that she was there every day. She would stand at the counter while I cooked and watch with this expression. I can only call patient endurance, like she was getting through something difficult but maintaining her composure admirably. She would ask questions that sounded like curiosity but landed like criticism. Things like, "Oh, is that how you do it? I've always heard you are supposed to do it differently, but maybe that is a regional thing." Or she would say, "You know, I read that this ingredient is actually not that great for you, but I guess once in a while is fine." Little drips of water, each one nothing, together over time enough to wear stone. One Saturday evening I made a pot roast. My grandmother made this pot roast. My mother made this pot roast. I have made this pot roast for every important occasion in my life for 40 years, and there has never been a single person who sat down to a bowl of it and did not ask for more. I made it that evening as something of a peace offering. I had been feeling the tension in the house and I wanted to do something warm and generous, something that said, "I am still here and I am still glad you are here and I still want this to work." I spent the whole afternoon on it. I browned the meat slowly the way my grandmother taught me. I added the vegetables at exactly the right time. I let it go low and slow for hours until the whole house smelled the way a home is supposed to smell. She sat down at the table, looked at the pot roast, and said to my son without looking at me, "I thought we had talked about red meat." Just that. I thought we had talked about red meat. She had made something separate for the grandchildren without telling me. She served them from her own pot while my pot roast sat in the center of the table. My son took a large helping and told me it smelled incredible, and I could see him trying to hold everything together with the force of his own cheerfulness. But my grandchildren ate something else while I sat at my own table with my grandmother, his recipe in front of me, and I kept that smile on my face through pure, stubborn will, and I did not let it slip, not once, not in front of those children. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the small back bedroom that used to be my sewing room, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about my life with a clarity that only comes in the very quiet hours. I thought about who I was before all of this. I thought about the woman who had worked 34 years of nursing shifts and never complained. The woman who had raised a son alone after his father left when the boy was 7. The woman who had planted roses and grown a garden and kept a clean house and loved her family with everything she had. I thought about how that woman was now in her own sewing room while someone else reorganized her kitchen and made comments at her table and taught her grandchildren to be suspicious of her love. Not just small, not just invisible. Gone. Like I had been edited out of my own life. I pray every night, but that night it was different. I did not ask for patience, which is what I usually ask for. I asked God to show me what I was supposed to do because I was genuinely lost. I asked, how do you love someone who does not want your love? I asked, how do you keep giving when the giving is being used against you? I did not get a clear answer that night, but I felt something settle in me, some quiet decision beginning to form in the deep part of me that is below words and below thought. The weeks before the makeup box incident were the hardest. Something had shifted in the atmosphere of the house. She had gotten into an argument with my son, I did not know what about, and the aftermath of it had spread through the house like weather. She was cold to everyone. She was short with the grandchildren, and they had gotten quiet and careful in the way children get when the adults around them are tense. My oldest grandchild had started coming to find me in the evenings after dinner, just to sit near me, not saying much, just needing the particular kind of quiet that a grandmother's presence can give. I would put my arm around that child and we would sit together on the porch and watch the evening come in, and I would not ask questions, and neither would he, and we would just be there together. Those were some of the most heartbreaking and most tender moments of those whole difficult months. She started leaving dishes in the sink immediately after I had finished cleaning the kitchen. Not one or two dishes, a full production. Pots, plates, glasses, everything. I would clean it and go to bed and come downstairs in the morning, and there it would be again. She would use up the last of things in the refrigerator and not mention it, so I would reach for something and find it gone. She would play the television at high volume late at night when I had to be up early. She would let the children run through the house in the early morning on my days to sleep in, which was the one thing I had asked for. Just 2 mornings a week to sleep until 7 instead of 5:30. Each of these things on its own was small. Each of them was the kind of thing that sounds petty to complain about. But living inside them, day after day, in your own home, it was like being slowly pressed, like a steady, gentle pressure that never quite stops. I kept my peace. I cleaned the dishes every time. I replaced what was used without comment. I wore earplugs to bed. I got up at 5:30 on the mornings I had wanted to sleep in, and I made breakfast for everyone, and I did not let anyone see it bother me. I was running on the last reserves of something I had been spending for 3 years, and I could feel the bottom getting close. Then came the Tuesday morning of the makeup box. I had a dentist appointment in the afternoon, and my morning was calm and ordinary. I went to the hallway bathroom to get my blood pressure medication from the shelf above the sink where I kept my week's pill organizer. The shelf was empty. I looked around and found my pill organizer on the floor behind the toilet, on its side open. The compartments for each day of the week had come apart when it fell, and the pills were scattered across the tile floor. I stood there in my bathroom looking at my pills on the floor, and something in me went very still and very cold. Those were my blood pressure medications. Those were pills I needed to take every morning at the same time to manage a condition that my doctor monitored carefully. They were not decorative objects or clutter. They were my medical necessities, and they were on the floor. I got down on my hands and knees on the cold bathroom tile, and I picked them up one by one, and I tried to sort out which day was which from the colors and shapes, and I put them back as best I could. My knees hurt on the hard floor. My back ached. I was on my hands and knees in my own bathroom at 68 years old, picking up my scattered medication. And all of those years, all of those swallowed feelings, all of those quiet nights crying into my coffee, all of it was right there pressing against the inside of my chest. I picked up the last pill. I stood up carefully. I closed the organizer. I was going to let it go. I had made letting things go into an art form, and I was going to do it again. But when I came out of the bathroom, she was standing in the hallway with her arms folded, and she looked at me, and whatever she saw in my face made her say, before I had spoken a single word, "What is your problem now? What is your problem now? Not what happened, are you all right? Is something wrong? What is your problem now?" Like my face having an expression was itself an inconvenience she was already tired of. I told her calmly, and I was proud of how calm my voice was, that my medication had been knocked to the floor and scattered, and I would appreciate it if she could please be careful around my things. That was all I said. Careful and quiet and entirely reasonable. She said she had no idea what I was talking about. She said I was always looking for a reason to make her the villain. She said this entire situation, meaning living in my house, in the home I had opened to them without hesitation, was exhausting because I made everything so difficult. I said that was not fair and that I was simply asking her to be careful. She said she was tired of walking on eggshells in this house. In this house, my house, the house I had lived in for 30 years, the house where I had raised my son, the house I had rearranged and surrendered pieces of and tried with everything I had to make into a comfortable place for her family to land when they needed help, and that is when she grabbed the makeup box. It was sitting on the hallway shelf where she kept it. One of those large, heavy wooden boxes with metal reinforced corners, the kind used for professional makeup artists, filled with all of her palettes and products. She grabbed it and she flung it. Not at me directly, I will say that honestly. I believe she flung it toward her bedroom door in pure frustrated rage. But the hallway was narrow and the box was large, and the metal corner of it caught my cheek as it flew past, and I felt the sting before I even fully processed what had happened. Then I felt the wetness. I touched my face. I looked at my fingers. There was blood on them. Not a dramatic amount, just a thin smear. Just enough. The hallway went completely silent. She was staring at my fingers. I was looking at my fingers. And in that silence, everything became very clear to me in a way it had not been before. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more certain than anger. A decision. I did not say a word. I walked back into the bathroom. I took a cotton pad from the cabinet. I pressed it gently to my cheek. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. 68 years old, 34 years a nurse, a woman who had given the absolute best of herself to every person she had ever loved, standing in her own bathroom, holding a cotton pad to her face because an object had been thrown in her home. I heard her get on the phone. I could hear her voice through the wall, low and urgent, and I knew she was calling my son. She was getting there first. She was building the version of the story that would arrive before I could say anything. I had watched her do this before, this careful construction of narrative, and I understood it for what it was. I was not angry about it. I was just done. My son came home within the hour. He looked at my cheek and the color drained from his face. He held my face in his hands the way he used to when he was small and I was the one who could fix things. And he said, "Mom, I am so sorry." And I could see that he genuinely was. He was not performing that. He was a good man who was horrified. Then he sat us both down at the kitchen table and he tried to mediate. He tried to find the middle because that is what he always did. Find the middle, find the place where everyone could meet and no one would have to fully reckon with anything. She cried. She was very good at crying, at a particular kind of tears that looked like vulnerability, but somehow always resulted in her position being protected. She said she was under unbearable stress. She said she had not meant for the box to go that direction. She said she felt so unwelcome in my home, so judged, so criticized. She said she had tried so hard and it was never enough. My son looked at me with those eyes. I knew those eyes. They were asking me to be the bigger person one more time. They were asking me to absorb one more thing, to smooth it over, to let it go for the sake of the peace and the family and the love we all had for each other. I looked at my son and I looked at his wife, and I made a decision that I had been building toward for 3 years without knowing it. I said no, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly and completely no. I said that I had been letting things go for 3 years. I said I had adjusted and accommodated and rearranged and swallowed things that I should not have had to swallow. I said I had been made to feel like a problem. In my own home for the entire time they had been living under my roof. I said that I had opened my home without hesitation when they needed help and that I deserved to be treated with basic respect in my own house and I had not been. And I said that an object had struck my face and drawn blood and I was not going to sit at this table and negotiate whether my feelings about that were valid. She tried to speak and I raised my hand. Just one hand, palm out, not aggressive, just clear. She stopped. I told my son that I loved him with everything in me, and that would never change for a single day of my life. I told him his children were my greatest joy and nothing on this earth would ever change that. I told him he would always be welcome in my home, and then I told him that his wife needed to make other arrangements. The room was very quiet after I said it. I do not think either of them had genuinely expected it. I had spent 3 years being the person who folded, and I think they had come to count on that. The fold was the one thing they were sure of, and I had stopped folding. I gave them 2 weeks. I did not ask them to leave immediately because those are my grandchildren, and I was not going to disrupt their lives more than necessary. I cooked every dinner of those 2 weeks, and I helped with homework every evening, and I read to the youngest one every night at bedtime, the way she had gotten used to. I was a grandmother in full for every one of those 14 days. I was warm and present and consistent because those children deserved that from me regardless of what was happening with the adults. But I did not retract the decision. I did not soften it or revisit it or leave a door open for renegotiation. The decision was made. They left on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later. My son carried boxes out to the car for hours. The grandchildren hugged me at the door and the youngest one held on for a long time and I held her back just as long, breathing in the smell of her hair, storing it up. My son hugged me last and it was a long hug, the kind that says more than words can, and I told him quietly that I loved him and that I was always here and that this was not the end of anything between us. He nodded and he could not speak for a moment, and then he got in the car. She said a polite goodbye at the door. I said a polite goodbye back. That was all there was between us. Everything that needed to be said had been said. The car pulled out of my driveway, and I watched it go from my porch. Then I went back inside my house. My quiet, still, rearranged, and then restored house. I made myself a cup of coffee, and I took it out to the porch, and I sat down in my chair, and I looked at my rose bushes, and I let everything come up that had been pushed down for so long. It was not triumph. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect it to feel like winning, and it does not. It felt like grief. Grief for the family I had pictured in my mind when my son got married, the easy, warm gatherings, the holidays around the table, the daughter I had hoped to have in her. Grief for the years of small wounds. Grief for my son being in the middle of something painful that he had not asked for. But underneath all of that grief, very solid and very quiet, was something that I recognized as myself. My own self, standing upright in my own life again, taking up the space I was entitled to take up. My son and I talk on the phone several times a week now. We have had long and honest conversations about what happened and what had been happening for years. He has said that he wishes he had seen more and done more, and that he is sorry for the times he asked me to simply be the bigger person when being the bigger person was costing me too much. Those conversations have been hard, and they have been healing, and our relationship is stronger now for having had them, honestly. The grandchildren come to me on weekends. Every Saturday I pick them up and we spend the day together. We work in the garden and we cook together. And we go to the park and we read books on the porch. My granddaughter asked me 2 weekends ago if I would teach her to make my soup. I lifted her up and sat her on the counter right beside me, and I walked her through every single step. She stirred that pot with the most focused and serious little face I have ever seen, and when it was done, she tasted it from a spoon, and her face opened up into this enormous smile. And she said, "Grandma, it tastes like your house." I had to look out the window for a moment so she would not see me cry. That is my life. That is the life I fought for when I finally stopped swallowing things that I should have put down years ago. A Saturday afternoon, and a little girl on a counter learning how to make soup. My rose bushes coming back every spring. My kitchen the way I like it. My house smelling the way my house is supposed to smell. My own self upright and present in the only life I have. The cut on my cheek healed within a week. It left no scar. The other things have taken longer, but they are healing too, and every day they heal a little more. I am telling you this story because I know there are women listening to me right now who are sitting in their own versions of what I lived. Women who are making themselves smaller and quieter and more invisible every day in order to keep peace with someone who is not keeping peace with them. Women who are being made to feel like problems in their own homes and lives and families. Women who are lying awake at night, trying to figure out what they did wrong, when the truth is they did not do anything wrong. They only made the mistake of giving without limit to someone who had no intention of giving back. You are allowed to stop. You have always been allowed to stop. Being a good mother does not mean accepting everything. Being a good woman does not mean having no limits. 68 years of giving generously and completely does not obligate you to 68 more years of being walked on. Your home is yours. Your peace matters. Your dignity is not a negotiable item on the table. I am not a perfect woman. I have never claimed to be. There are things I would do differently if I could go back. Conversations I would have had sooner and more directly. Limits I would have set earlier and with less apology. But I am standing here in my own life, in my own home, on my own porch, and that is something I will not trade away again for anyone. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me where you are watching from today. Drop your city in the comments right below this video. And if this story touched something in you, if you have a grandmother, or you are a grandmother, or you just believe that women who give everything deserve to be treated with love and respect, please give this a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you are new, because I have more stories, and every single one of them is true, and every single one of them comes from this life I have lived. Thank you so much for sitting with me today. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the people who love you. And please, never let anyone make you feel small in your own home.